Uh, I met Jester in 1935. Uh, my and when he came to California to do run green pastures, to picture green pastures, and I was that time was a music teacher in Los Angeles, and was interested in and was very much acquainted with all of the nationally known musicians at the time, which include Hall Johnson and Nathaniel Dett, Burley, and many of the others who were internationally known at that time. Du Bois was, and all of those groups were the nationally known Negroes, or blacks, or Negroes we were known back in those years. And when Jester came to town, and I was introduced to him, and as being director of one of the larger church choirs in Los Angeles, we became to be fast friends. And then the relationship that his grandfather and my grandfather both came from somewhere here in Carolina. And it was all one big family. And we didn't, we knew there was some kinship. Jester looks very much like, could be the brother of my grandfather when I was 10, as I remember him, when I was only about 10 or 12 years old.
Oh. So at the time that you met, you had no idea that there was this kinship?
Yes and no, except that I didn't know my family, anybody in Carolina. I knew that my grandfather told me that he came to Georgia around Atlanta and that slavery ended when he was 5 years old. But I didn't know about, except that I know my grandfather and my father. The white Hairstons and the black Hairstons have always been very closely associated. The white, my father and my grandfather used to make annual pilgrimages about once or twice a year, because my father had been the accompanying growing up slave, like Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn, with some of the white Hairstons around Atlanta. So they've always been some sort of relationship, but we children knew nothing about those relationships because they were kept among the adults.
Oh, that's very interesting. What stories can you think about that really kind of show about Jester? What stories can you think about that really kind of define Jester and the man that he is?
I grew up with Jester because I was, and to the extent that when he came to California, he was a young singer in the Hall Johnson choir, but was Hall Johnson's assistant. But Hall, as the director of the Hall Johnson choir, they came out to do Green Pastures. He had, although he had graduated from Tufts and other background in music, his time at that time as a director had not developed. It was just beginning and began and grew, beginning with that time in Los Angeles. And the time Johnson became incapacitated, and Jester, and I encouraged Jester, being his assistant, to take over the Hall Johnson choir. And because I had that time, I think, a little more leadership experience, and because Jester was just developing, he was, although he was, had the capacity, and was very obvious that he had this capacity, but it hadn't been developed because he had been under the direction of Hall Johnson, who was a very dominant musician.
Mm-hmm. And when about what time was that?
1936, around 1936, 37.
Did you go to Russia with Jester for the big choir?
No, I went to China with him later, but not to Russia. That was his latest trip.
Tell me about China.
China, we went to a number of choirs that went from Los Angeles to China. and they gave concerts at the various conservatories in Beijing and Shanghai. But in Shanghai, city of millions, of course, and they had a lot of their classical music and classic artistic development is equivalent to New York or any place, but they still had the classic type of development. So our folk music fit in very well with what they were and what they thought of as representing China. And this was a very enriching experience for me, because for my first time I began to see China from the inside, and to learn what they were thinking by hearing their music, although I did not know the language.
Would you say that the Jester had a big success over there?
Oh, yes, yes. There were white choirs and others. We all sang folk music, but the folk music the white choirs sang was a different type of folk music from what the black folk music, as much as country music or the country music of Tennessee and that group is different from what the blacks sang or from the farms in Georgia and Mississippi. There are three very distinct feelings and appreciations which each one of those cultures have developed. One being very religious, the other, the other they were just different cultural backgrounds.
Tell me a little bit about you, Archie. Where did you grow up in your education and so on, and what can you tell us about you?
I grew up. I was born in Atlanta, Georgia, and because the public schools of Atlanta in the 20s had no high school for blacks. The school for the average black went to the 7th grade. If you got above the 7th grade, you had to go into the colleges. My father had no money to send me to the local colleges like Morehouse and Atlanta University and the others, for which you could continue on into college. So I went actually to finish high school. I had to go to Alabama to a Seventh Day Adventist church college, where I graduated from high school. And from there, I went to New York, and then up to Atlantic Union College in Massachusetts, similar to the Seventh Day Adventists. And then, after graduating from there in music and pre-med, I moved to California to study medicine.
And were you a practicing physician for years?
No, I didn't finish medicine. I was in mental depression, so I had to drop out of medical school, so I started into teaching music. My voice, piano, which I had those two majors and going through college in Massachusetts.
Tell you what, could you move just a little bit that way? We're starting to get, or maybe a little bit that way. I was trying to get the sun out of your face. Just a little more. That's good, yeah. The sun just has some spots. Did you work with some of the famous Black Hollywood stars other than Jester?
I knew them, Louise Beavers. I knew Stephen Fetchit, and those were the period in which I knew them. I'm just trying to remember them, but at that time, being the religious group that I belonged to, we didn't associate too much with the theater. We recognize artistry and ability to express the feelings and comedy and the sorrows and the aspirations of the black throughout the world, particularly throughout where we lived, and how to develop and the growth and to motivate blacks to be all that they could possibly be. This was what education meant to us, not the money that you could learn to acquire, but the value of being rather than having, which we emphasized. And still, I think those kind of values are the values which I aspire to, and that those are the same ones that Jester. And that's why he teaches those values which he felt in Hall Johnson to integrate our American Negro music, much as Bach and Brahms and the others express the feelings and the perceptions of their age and the people, their people.
When you say, were you with the Seventh Day Adventists in L.A.?
Yes.
And so that,
but I directed choirs in other churches because my church did not believe in paying the musicians. But the other churches, the Baptists, the Methodists, and all the others, recognized ability, and they were willing to pay the directors of their. And so most of my work was with other than the Seventh Day Adventist group because of the fact that I had to live, and I was away from my family, 3,000 miles away from my family alone.
I think people can understand that.
Yes.
Let me ask you one more thing. Jester probably is in the later half of his life at this point, I would say. How do you think he's going to be remembered once he's gone?
Well, the world is constantly changing, and the appreciations of every generation changes. I remember when I was a kid, when we were listening to Caruso in the 20s, and they were debating then about Caruso, which represented the art of that time, and some of the other, and John McCormick, and some of the others. The appreciations then and the critiques at that time was talking about Caruso, who could not sing English, and he could not articulate English. The old Sole Mio, he never sang that he never sang in English. John McCormick did sing in English, but his voice and type of voice that he that was culturally considered classical at that time did not move along. And this same thing is happening now. Music, there's a changing value that each nation has, and as we were talking, I was talking with Peter the other night, and I was pointing out to him that Jester represents a small segment of even Negro music, and that he is preserving. It is not the music now is developing, so there's a lot of emotion and physical activity in the music that is given now and then considered Negro music, and is grown into what we recognize as jazz. So that Jester's music is now in that waning area where people, thinking people, understand what we're talking about here now as being expressing the perceptions and the feelings of a race. But what is considered today what blacks are thinking and doing is different, because we're into this egalitarian type of idea, egalitarian idea of becoming equal. When you're becoming equal and you get the mixture, then one dissolves out and accepts what they like about the other generation and drops the one that they're just leaving. So in a sense, because of the growth of knowledge and the dominance of the media, we are all in a state of not knowing what we call good even. Good is a value that is being defined every day. It isn't one that's static. It is a changing, growing with society and its values. And this will never end. I know when I was taking education philosophy back, and we used to sing "Abide with Me," but we got to this idea: change and decay, even all around we see, was a great idea. Change was identified with decay, but not with growth. And we have that same kind of idea now. We don't know what really good is. We are constantly thinking and trying to find out what is good. And good today may not be good tomorrow.
I think that's a real good point. Is there anything else you can think of that you'd like to say about the Negro music or Jester or anything about the whole the plantation, or have you got any real thoughts that you'd like to get down on tape about any of those topics?
My hope is that Negroes, blacks, whatever we wish to identify ourselves, is that we can learn to appreciate the fact that there is growth and change, and to acquire the knowledges and skills educationally that will equip us to appreciate growth and change, and not to expect it to be passed on to us without some effort on the part of each of us. We should develop each one the best abilities he has to accept and contribute to change and growth, because those are really the things we should think about, and not really our problem is, even today we have, and is to try to help our young people, Negroes, Hairstons, to carry on where Jester and I are leaving off. My children, my brother's children, and my children don't necessarily appreciate all that we are doing, because they don't understand and the feelings. In fact, they don't know how much change has taken place, you know, from the time that in the last 20 or 30 years even.
That's a good point. I think we're just about at the end of the tape. If there's anything else,
and learn the languages and the media methods by which these curiosities can be expressed.
All righty. Well, I sure appreciate your. Archie, if you could, how about talking a little bit on the concept of success and what it means to you and Jester, and what it means today, and how this relates to what it's all about?
In a discussion with an English teacher friend of ours from one of the local colleges, we were discussing English teachers and liberal arts education as how and what it contributes to, and what it should contribute to us as individuals. We need to learn good English, or good in some language, and learn to articulate what we believe is good, and what makes us live here in this world, in the existential situation, because nature and life is not perfect. We must create in our own world, for each of us, for ourselves. But in order to perpetuate that and to enrich it, we need to learn the greatest ways to express feelings. Most people cannot articulate feelings generally, how they feel and what makes them feel good, and what is good generally, or what may be good generally, to perpetuate us in the existence which we have here in this world. The problem that we have now in so many religions is that so many individuals have decided that their belief and their appreciations are the things which are good, but the absolutes are the problems. There's no absolutes in any problem or belief. Are the stumbling blocks in our world today. In fact, it is causing the religious wars which we have perpetuated through the years. But good as it affects the individual, have remained somewhat constant. But what those are at a given time in the growth of our world changes. In the industrial world which we live today is different from what it was, and the very stoic, I should say, very beautiful world that we live here, talk about today here on this plantation. And this beauty here, as we look around, has space, but our world does not, in the cities, does not have space. We must create our own space in our own minds, but in order to pass that on, we need the liberal arts type of education to study psychology, philosophy, science, and all of those, and the vocabulary to express those to make our existence as best possible.
What about, how do kids today what do kids think of as success today? I mean, what does the average kid think of today as success?
Success today is a media type of success, and the value of money. And those goals to get on television or to be seen and to be known as successful in any of the sports which require very little preparation, maybe just a gift of being tall and agile, with no development whatever. And many of these people who have these gifts have no articulative ability whatever. And they can't express their feelings, and you can hardly express how they got the way they are. They don't know how they got the way they are. It just grew, like it's something that it happened to them. But we are learning some of the ways in which people become what we have learned to think of as great. But that requires us to have knowledges in broad areas of experience. Particularly we need English. I would have been happy to think, in my own experience, that many of the math teachers who talked about the big problem with the average math student is he doesn't understand English. He can't communicate ideas in his conceptualization, have not developed verbally, so that he can express it and accept it from someone else, because he does not understand communication. And this is a big problem, communicating feelings of success other than the mere acquisition of wealth.